am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and we are going to do some color mixing today with neon acid dyes. We are going to do a triad color exercise using Dharma, Fluorescent Lemon, Fluorescent Fuchsia, and Frozen. There isn't a fluorescent blue in the Dharma line, and Frozen is the color that I often use as my neon counterpart, even though maybe I should use turquoise because it bleeds similarly to fluorescent colors, but I am going to stick with the blue that I usually pair with these fluorescent colors, and then we can decide later on if I'm going to modify that further. Here are the three colors at a 0.5% depth of shade, where we have half of a gram of dye per 100 grams of yarn. Our frozen blue is a bit more intense if you go up to a 1% depth of shade, but I'm tempted to leave it where it is because I want to see how it pairs with the pink and yellow to see where we come across when it comes to our secondary colors. Because although next to the primaries, the 0.5% depth of shade of frozen blue maybe is not quite as bright, this fits in really well with the green because I think that if we bring in that 1% depth of shade, the green jump just feels a little too extreme. This feels deeper than both the purple and the green, so I think I like the lighter one a little bit more. So anyway, for today, I'm gonna set things up aiming for a 0.5% depth of shade of these colors, and then we'll see how some of the secondaries compare to our premixed colors of Purple Pop, Radioactive, and Fluorescent Safety Orange. Most of the time when I do color mixing, I go for a 1% depth of shade, but fluorescent colors can take a lot more time to absorb to the yarn, and a lot of them at a 1% depth of shade will bleed and bleed and bleed when it comes to washing. But I did not have a big problem at the 0.5%, so that is what we're going for today. Today we're going to dye 15 samples, and we will have one sample of each color at our corners where it is just that pure primary color. Even though I'm not sure if these are all primaries, there might be some blends of colors. We will have pure fluorescent lemon, fluorescent fuchsia, and frozen in those samples. As a reminder, the depth of shade of yarn is defined as the number of grams of dye per 100 grams of yarn. So the 1% depth of shade would have 1 gram of dye per 100 grams of yarn, and the 0.5% depth of shade I keep referring to is a 0.5 gram of dye per 100 grams of yarn. Both depth of shade and stock solutions are things that are referred to as percents. For the depth of shade, we are looking at the grams of dye per 100 grams of yarn. And with a stock solution, we're looking at the grams of dye per 100 milliliters of liquid. And so that is the difference between the two. With your stock solutions, you can dissolve however much dye you want in whatever volume you want, as long as it's soluble, and then do your calculations based off of that. And so the stock solution concentration doesn't matter for the final depth of shade if you're using a technique where all of the dye can access all of the yarn. And when you want to calculate how much dye you will need for each sample, you will take the depth of shade divided by the stock solution times the weight of yarn that you are going to be using. And sort of to break this down a little bit more, we've got our grams of dye per 100 grams of yarn times our grams of dye per 100 milliliters. I sort of boxed things so you would see where the units come from, and our grams of dye cancel out. We multiply it by the grams of yarn we're going to use, which cancels out the grams of yarn. We're left with 1/milliliter, and if we work out all the rest of those numbers, that'll tell us the number of milliliters you need of your stock solution at whatever concentration your stock solution was at to dye your yarn at a given depth of shade. I am going through all of this math again today. I do have videos where I talk just about it, but mainly because I have stock solutions that are at 3 different concentrations. My fluorescent lemon and frozen are both a 1% stock solution, but I accidentally added a little bit too much water to the fluorescent fuchsia, and so that stock solution concentration is only at a 0.9%. So we have 0.9 grams of dye per 100 milliliters of liquid. And so my plan is to create 0.5% stocks of these three colors. And this way I will be able to treat them all the same when I'm doing my measurements. I could go ahead and figure out how many different milliliters I would need for each of the samples starting from this 1% stock, but I figured it would be a little bit easier for me to correct things first. And so here is just the little bit of the dilution math that I'm gonna do before we start. So these numbers are all if I want 100 milliliters. I might shift the numbers to make a little bit more. But if I wanted to make a 0.5% stock solution from a 1% stock solution, I just need to add an equal volume of water. So if I took 50 milliliters of the blue 1% stock and added 50 milliliters of water, that would give us our 0.5% stock solution. And similar for the yellow. For the pink, I would need 55.5 milliliters of our 0.9% stock solution and 45.5 milliliters of water. So that's how I am going to go from our 1% or 0.9% stocks to our 0.5% stock solutions. It just so happens that I want the depth of shade in each sample to be 0.5. You don't have to have a 0.5% stock solution to get a 0.5% depth of shade. If I go back over here, we could have any depth of shade and any stock solution concentration, and then you can calculate the amount you need. It just so happens they're the same number today. So therefore, to dye 20 grams of yarn at a 0.5% depth of shade, we're gonna need 20 milliliters of our 0.5% stock solution. And if I had a 1% stock solution, this number would be 10 milliliters total. If I had a 2% stock solution, this number would be 5 milliliters total. And I encourage you to go and play around with the math a little bit so you can start to see how those relationships work out. But anyway, this whole math interlude is to explain why the numbers here look very similar to another triangle where I've dyed 20 grams of yarn in each sample in the past. So for example, from the blue, I'm gonna add 20 milliliters of the blue here, then 15 milliliters, 10, then 5. And the yellow will go 20, 15, 10, 5, and the pink 20, 15, 10, 5. So we will have at sort of these center midpoints, we will have a 1-to-1 ratio of each of the primaries. And then in here, we'll have some mixtures of all three. And again, if you made your 1% stock solutions properly, then you could do this with 10 milliliters of dye here, 7.5, 5, 2.5. And carry on that way, which is how I would have done this if I didn't decide I wanted to just talk about making different volumes of stock solutions and go into the math a little bit more than I have recently. Now that I have the plan, it's time to start setting things up. I decided to make 110 milliliters of each of the 0.5% stock solutions, meaning that I measured out 55 milliliters of the yellow and blue, adding them to 55 milliliters of water, and for the pink, I measured out a hair over 61 milliliters of the pink stock, and then a hair under 49 milliliters of water. And the reason for that hair is that I just don't have the precision with the graduated cylinders that I'm using to measure out the volumes. The reason why I am measuring out a bit more than originally I discussed is that I will need exactly 100 milliliters of each of these stocks for our color mixing exercise. And take it from a trained scientist, when you're making a stock, you always want to make sure you have more volume than you think you need, because you don't want to be a little bit short at the end that can throw off all of your results. We now have our 3 stocks ready to go, and if we lost a little bit of liquid from like measuring things in the graduated cylinders and whatnot, we should have plenty for our mixing. And just as an early thing, rinsing out our stuff, I would say the blue potentially is the least potent, which I think is also something that we would have hypothesized already anyway. These are 15, I think 16 ounce takeout containers, and I am going to add 1 cup of plain tap water to each of them. Starting with our 0.5% stock solution of fluorescent lemon, I added color to our containers, varying between 20 and 5 milliliters depending on the container. We would have a total of 20 milliliters of dye in each container once I finished adding all 3 colors. As a reminder, here is the breakdown of the colors that we did in the ratios. I am fairly impressed here. I anticipated, I'm going to start stirring these up, that the pink would be the dominant, and I wasn't sure. Well, yellow is very rarely a dominant color at all, but it was so bright that I just didn't know how it might end up. But I think that we have some really good mixing here. What I like to see for a balance of colors, even if, say, all of these secondary mixtures, if all of them are leaning in one direction versus another, I like to see colors that, like, in these middle areas that feel different from the primaries. And the oranges do feel a little bit very similar to the pink, but otherwise the balance is pretty good. We've got 3 greens mixed there. We've got 3, maybe that's a berry pink, but it's definitely distinct. These oranges are the ones that are the closest. So overall, I am excited and impressed. Okay, so for our mixtures of 3 colors, this one feels like a reddish color. This one feels more orange. And I think this final one is still reddish, but it's looking more brown, pretty much. Maybe a hint of green in there. But now let's add our yarn. The yarn we are using today is Wool to Dye-Force Platinum Sock. This yarn is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, and I dye it a lot, but this is also the same base that I used in my video when I was looking at different depths of shade of these neon colors. And so I thought it would be a good one to use here today. Now the colors I am most curious about. Ooh, that's a red. Ooh, that's not even necessarily orange. That feels, and it's definitely not pink. It feels super red. That is very green. And it's a pinkish purple, but that's a purple. That is definitely a purple. So that's pretty good. I'm curious how this might compare to Purple Pop. I feel like it's a little bit more blue than Purple Pop, but we will definitely have to look at all of these colors with a black light at the end of the video once everything is dry. Now the approach that I'm using today is a cold process. Oh, that could be orangish. A bit orangish maybe, but reddish orange. The technique that I'm using today is a cold process one. So eventually we will add acid to these containers and we'll let the yarn sit for a couple of days. During that time, a lot of the color will absorb to the yarn, but there could be just a little bit of color that does not absorb well. And for that, I could always heat set things individually. But when I did my depth of shade of these neon colors video, I did find that after a couple days, even at a cold room temperature in the winter, we had really, really good success with these colors binding to the yarn. And I only noticed a tiny bit of color transfer. Ironically, I think it was some yellow onto some blue in the steamer basket. But we will steam set these, I guess, in a couple of days. But, oh, I'm excited! Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. Okay, so this green that is 3 parts blue, no, sorry, 3 parts yellow, 1 part blue, is definitely the closest to radioactive, but I think radioactive is even a bit more yellow than that. I'm so curious to see which is how these look under a black light. This orange also is right here, is probably the closest to fluorescent safety orange. But again, fluorescent safety orange might be a little bit more yellow leaning. I think of the blend colors, the fluorescent safety orange is the one that is the most fluorescent because it has both the yellow and the pink in it. I don't think it has any non-fluorescent pigments in it. Now, these purples will potentially break, and so we might see more blue patches and more pink patches within there because frozen does tend to strike a lot faster than fluorescent pinks. Okay, so right now, ooh, look at that green on it. Something green has struck. The pinks are probably the slowest. We might see some beautiful breaking in these ones as well. Ooh, this is so fun. So I would say that this one is brownish but leaning green. This one is like a burnt orange, not bright at all. And this one is more of a rose pink that is very, very pretty. I mean, I would say from this, there's no question that we can create a gorgeous neon rainbow with these colors. Like I might pick this purple, I want either of these greens and probably that orange. The fact that these three colors are so distinct from the rest shows how well our yellow, pink, and blue are balanced together. I'm really, really happy. I feel like in some respects, this is one of the most balanced rainbows I've ever attempted using equal amounts of the three colors. I didn't weight this triangle with blue, and had I done that, the greens would have been shifted more blue and the purples would have as well. So I'm glad I went with my gut. Do I always say something is my favorite rainbow? Maybe. Could that be true? Maybe. I'm now adding 1 tablespoon of white vinegar into each of the cups. This is more acid than normally I might do. Normally I think I would do about a teaspoon, but this is the ratio that I used when I played with the depths of shade, and that worked very well. So we are gonna go with this and see where we end up. Now, the only problem with doing a triad like this is that we don't end up with like a true 1-to-1-to-1 ratio of any of the three colors. Like of our three mixtures, we have one that's a little more yellow leaning, one that's a little bit more pink leaning, and one that's a bit more blue leaning, but we don't have something that fits in the middle of all three. And so one thing I have always wanted to try is to do a triangle that is larger. I want more than 15, and to try to set something like that up. I mean, there's a limit to what my counter could do, but can you imagine like seeing so much more nuance between the blue and the pink? Like that would be so, so cool. I don't know if I stirred these ones already, so stirring will not hurt. I do want to stir it up a bit to distribute the acid. So, and I am wiping the spoon in between different colors. Ooh, these are so cool. So, so cool. I really, really like the fluorescent dyes. I love bright colors. That purple is great. I hope that the colors strike well, because if they do, that could be something that I come back to over and over again. But anyway, we're now set up, and so all we have to do now is wait to see how these colors turn out. And I'm expecting these three will end up looking pretty interesting, because you can see there's like a lot of green on it, but there's a lot of color left. And I think if I were to pick this one up, well, fine, maybe it's not green yet, but I can see the colors breaking. I can just see different ratios of hues. But anyway, I am going to cover all these, set them aside, and we'll check back in a couple of days. And as for the leftovers, it's not going to be quite a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio of all these colors if I mix them together. but it might be approaching a little bit close just because we mixed the same volume of these 3 dyes. We rinsed and measured about the same amount of dye in graduated cylinders, so some of that extra could be approximately the same. I mean, I'm tempted to just mix these 3 brights together and see what kind of color we end up with. It'll be more pastel than what we have waiting in the cool vats, but I'm still curious. I took my dedicated stainless steel dye pot and started rinsing out the syringes into it to collect that residual color. Then I took the other residual dye from the other cups, including the approximately 10 milliliters of a 0.5% stock solution of each color. Once I had all the dye containers rinsed out and all that dye in the pot, I brought over 100 grams of Knit Pick Stroll fingering weight yarn that I pre-soaked for a little over 30 minutes. This yarn, just like our minis, is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. And I added the yarn to the pot, stirring things around to get a reasonable coverage of color. To our dye bath, I'm adding 3 tablespoons of white vinegar. And now I am going to go and heat this for at least 30 minutes. But when I move this, or even squeeze some out, there's like greenish undertones in the color already, which is really, really cool. And we do have a lot of pink that has yet to set. So this is very interesting and a lot more pastel than the other colors. But anyway, we're gonna go heat set it. This color is so weird. It's like brown and orange, like a little bit green. Most of the color has absorbed. Ooh, when I pick it up, I really see the green notes. This reminds me a lot actually of the food coloring I got when I mixed all 50 colors of AmeriColor food coloring together. But anyway, I'm gonna turn off the heat, let this cool completely in the dye pot, and then I'm gonna wash it off camera. So that way we can now finally check in on our color mixing. Let's go look at the triangle. It's been a few days, and so let's see how this neon color mixing has gone. For a while, I've had a video on my ideas list, and that would be to shift the balance of the colors a little bit to create a more balanced rainbow when we do this kind of exercise. And I will say this is the most balanced rainbow in a color mixing triad I have ever seen. Each of our primaries look different from the various secondaries. And the 3 in the middle are very neutral and look nothing like anything around them. And so that is really, really cool. Now, I'm not sure if I would call a perfect rainbow, you know, with those 3 with the primaries. That is something we will play around with once we have the dry yarn. And I'm very excited to compare these 3 colors to Purple Pop, these 3 to Radioactive, and these 3 to Fluorescent Safety Orange, because I feel like those all lean maybe a little bit more yellow or a little bit more pink than what we have here. And of course, we'll take a peek at this under a black light because we've got to do it. We got to know. But now let's see how we did color absorption wise. There's always a chance when I do things like this that we could end up getting some color transfer in the steamer basket. And the one that I worry about is transfer onto lighter colors from darker colors. And so while there are hints of color left in these containers, most of the color is in the yarn. And so that is just great. And I'm peeking at our other pink ones. I guess I will do this all in a time lapse in a second, but it's pretty good. So now I'm gonna go steam them in my steamer basket for at least 30 minutes. I collected the mini skeins onto zip ties just to prevent any tangles, trying to group similar-ish colors together and maybe keeping our yellow friend a little bit more by itself. I am so glad that the cold process works for these fluorescent colors. I did do a test at one point about whether or not I could put these whole takeout containers in a steamer basket, And that is something that I could have done if I needed to. So then I would be able to heat set multiple samples at a time without waiting for my more limited collection of dyeing mason jars. But we can steam set these directly, and so that's fantastic. The 30 minutes are up, so I'm gonna turn off the heat and let the colors cool. You know, I wasn't sure about what I would do with those muteds, but looking at these oranges with those muted colors, it looks very, very fall, and so we might be able to make a set after all. Let's wash our gorgeous, gorgeous yarn. I love the way that all of these colors are glowing, and ooh, I'm very excited to explore some of these greens more. Well, yeah, I guess I'm very, very excited to see how these colors compare to Purple Pop, Fluorescent Orange, and Radioactive. But that is looking good, my friends. I'm now going to add a little bit of some dish soap. And we will let our basin fill up with water. I mean, I feel like our oranges are glowing just as much as the pink, and some of these greens feel very glowy to me. Maybe this really is just a better way to get neon colors. Especially because of how like radioactive breaks. Sometimes I love the color radioactive, and other times I wish that it was a little bit different, but who knows? Who knows? But anyway, I'm not seeing any color bleeding, which is awesome. So I'm gonna finish rinsing out the soap, put the yarn through my spin dryer, and hang it up to dry. And now let's see what happens when we did color mixing, starting with 3 neon primaries. Of these 3 colors, the fluorescent lemon and fluorescent fuchsia are both colors that Dharma lists as primaries on their website. The frozen is not, and so it could be worth redoing this using Caribbean blue, which is a bright blue primary color, to see where we end up and to see balance-wise how that sort of fits in with the two. Because I would say these two are feeling very neon, very fluorescent, and this one is a bright blue, but doesn't quite hit the same punch as the other two. If we expand our triangle and look at the 50-50 mixes of each color, this is a pretty balanced rainbow. I mean, we absolutely have a purple, a green, and an orange here. They do all feel like they're a great blend of the colors. Expanding our triangle again gives us something so balanced feeling. In each of the cases, there's a jump between our primary to the 2 colors next to it. I would say things probably still lean a little bit pink heavy or a little bit blue heavy, but I mean, I think that, again, this is probably one of the most balanced triangles I've ever seen. Now, where would radioactive fit? Actually, I would say that is even more yellow, maybe. I mean, this feels like actually a little bit better of a neon green. This one feels a little bit brighter, which is cool. As far as the fluorescent safety orange, this is a really good match. So 3 parts yellow, 1 part pink is pretty close to fluorescent safety orange. And as for our purple pop, I would say that we are a really good match here for using 3 parts pink, 1 part blue. So while those 3 neon secondary colors do fit and we have pretty good matches from the colors that we mixed, it's not necessarily as balanced as the midpoints that we created, but I think that we are picking the most neon green, the most neon orange, and the most neon purple that we could get out of this set. The other thing that I will note though is we have a pretty good neon red here, which is fun. Bringing in our mixtures of all 3 colors, there's one that leans more yellow, one that leans more blue, and one that leans more red. But the thing that is the best is that all 3 of these colors are fairly muted compared to everything else that is really bright. If we look at some of the other triangles, sometimes we'll find like one of the bottom triangles here or here feels very, very dark. And so that really shows one of the colors being the dominant. And sometimes the three colors in the middle look really, really similar. Today, it doesn't necessarily feel that way. This feels so balanced that we could do so much with this. Now, the one thing we don't have here is the color that would fit there in the center, a true midpoint. This isn't a midpoint exactly because it's not a 0.5% depth of shade like the rest of the colors that we have here. But this is a more equal mixture of the three colors, and we have something that is actually a pretty good approximation for my flesh tone. It is very neutral. There's some hints that are more green, hints that are more peach, but I like it a lot more now dry than I did when wet. And I think the thing that is the most fun is that this is a combination of a neon blue, yellow, and pink. I mean, that's pretty cool, right? I am such a huge fan of these brights that we mixed. Ooh, the possibilities of sets, of playing with colors. I mean, this is so me. And could it be expanded even more? Oof. Clearly, I'm gonna need to like make myself a set and play with that at some point. As I was mixing this, I am sure that I wondered, ooh, what would happen if I were to mix, say, the other three fluorescent colors together? And well, I've already filmed that video, and so that should be coming out soon, actually. And I'll be talking more about these colors in that video as well. So please make sure you're subscribed and turn on your notifications so you never miss a new video, because it's a lot of fun, and especially in comparison with these colors that we mixed, I cannot wait for you to see where it ends up. Now, as for sets, this could work really well on its own. Of all the colors, the yellow, I think, pops a little bit more. I think that we could have like one more color, say maybe 5% blue or 5% pink with the yellow to really sort of smooth it in a little bit more. But I think that we can create a really beautiful rainbow using every other of these colors. I mean, this is just a perfect rainbow of brights. Even though I may try to do one that is less neon, but this is a wonderful rainbow. And this as a set is also still really, really fun. And so for all, this is a delightful set of 12. I think it also makes two beautiful sets of 6. Believe it or not, I almost forgot one thing I wanted to do for this video. And that is look at everything with the black light. All right, I have turned off most of the lights in where I filmed, the room where I filmed conclusions. I may go into the closet if I need to, but I think you can still see pretty well the ones that pop. I'm curious if those mixtures are glowing very much. They are a little bit, but clearly you can see the yellow and the greens are popping the most. And then the purples aren't popping very much, but that's because the blue isn't fluorescent. But yeah, if we look at the yarn, then turn this on, you can see what's glowing. But let's go into the closet. All right, we're in the closet, and here we go. Everything may be in a slightly different order than it was outside. Now, certainly, as I said, the ones with yellow in it are glowing the most, but are just pink, and then the oranges that we mixed also are glowing a fair amount. These 3 colors, or actually 4 colors, I suppose, that are blends of everything are glowing a bit as well. It's just a lot less than these ones back here. And so, yeah, everything is fluorescent, except for just the blue, because that's not a fluorescent dye. Fluorescent colors are a lot of fun, and not just because they are neon. It's just fun to see how the colors pop under a black light. I do feel like seeing how they glow when there's a little bit of natural light around is a little more realistic for how colors may pop, say, when you're walking under a black light at the New England Aquarium or things like that. But yeah, I just think they're fun in natural light, fun under black light. And if you want to see me play more with these fluorescent colors, stay tuned because there are a lot of videos, a lot of rainbow videos coming up as part of the Spring Mini Skein mini-series. Thank you so much for watching.